The air in Judge Wilson's chambers was thick with anticipation and greed. Sunlight filtered through heavy velvet curtains, casting long shadows across the mahogany table where the Montgomery family had gathered. Outside, spring had painted the world in vibrant colors, but inside, black was a predominant shade as the family mourned or pretended to mourn the passing of Harrison Montgomery, one of the city's wealthiest business magnates. Among them, almost invisible against the wall, stood Amelia Santos. At 52, her once black hair now streaked with silver, she kept her hands folded neatly at her waist, a habit formed from 25 years of service as the Montgomery family's most loyal maid. But there was something in her posture today, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place for someone of her station. Her eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing as she watched the family she had served for nearly half her life. Richard Montgomery, the eldest son, continuously checked his Rolex watch, as if he had more important places to be than his father's while reading. His wife, Vanessa, sat beside him, her diamond earrings catching the light with every slight movement of her head. Patricia, the middle child, dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, while her husband, Thomas, scrolled through his phone under the table. And Marcus, the youngest at 37, slouched in his chair, nursing what was clearly not his first drink of the day, despite it being barely past noon. None of them had visited Harrison during his final months. None except Amelia, who had been there every day, administering his medication, reading to him from his favorite books, and listening to stories of his youth that his children had never bothered to hear. "Shall we begin?" Judge Wilson asked, adjusting his glasses as he settled into the large leather chair at the head of the table. The family straightened, suddenly alert. Even Marcus set down his glass. What followed was expected the distribution of Harrison Montgomery's vast fortune among his children and grandchildren. But as Judge Wilson continued reading, frowns began to form on the faces of the Montgomery heirs. The numbers were smaller than anticipated. Much smaller. Richard leaned forward, his knuckles white against the polished table. "There must be some mistake," he interrupted. "My father's estate was valued at well over $50 million. These allocations don't even account for half that amount." Judge Wilson peered over his glasses. "If you'll allow me to continue, Mr. Montgomery, all will be explained." And that's when it happened. After listing several charitable donations and provisions for longtime employees, Judge Wilson cleared his throat and delivered the words that would change everything. "And finally, to Amelia Santos, who has served not just as my housekeeper, but as my most trusted confidant and friend for 25 years, I leave the sum of $20 million, my summer house in Cape Cod, and 20% ownership of Montgomery Industries." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, Amelia stood up, and everyone in the room froze. Dramatic music swells. What happens next will shock you. Stay with me as we uncover the truth behind Harrison Montgomery's final wishes, the secret relationship that no one suspected, and how one woman's quiet strength would ultimately change an entire family forever. Music transition. Let's dive deeper into who these people really are. The Montgomerys weren't just any wealthy family. They were old money, the kind that built cities and toppled politicians with a single phone call. Harrison Montgomery had transformed his grandfather's modest manufacturing business into a global empire through cunning vision and some whispered ruthlessness. Richard, at 45, had his father's sharp features but none of his business acumen. Despite his Harvard MBA and his position as COO of Montgomery Industries, the company's stock had fallen 15% under his leadership. What the board didn't know, what only Harrison and Amelia knew, was that Richard had been quietly embezzling funds to cover massive gambling debts that threatened to destroy his marriage and reputation. Patricia, 42, had never worked a day in her life. Her contribution to society consisted mainly of charity galas where more money was spent on decor than was raised for the actual causes. Her third husband, Thomas, was an investment banker 20 years her senior who had been steadily moving Patricia's trust fund into increasingly risky investments. Marcus, the baby of the family, had his mother's striking blue eyes and charming smile. He'd bounced from one expensive college to another without ever graduating, leaving behind a trail of scandals and broken hearts. His current girlfriend, a 23-year-old model who had conveniently been unable to attend the will reading, cost Harrison approximately $30,000 a month in emergencies and business opportunities. And then there was Amelia, born to Portuguese immigrants in a small fishing town. She had come to work for the Montgomerys after putting her own dreams of college on hold to support her family after her father's death. What had begun as a temporary position became her life's work, not out of lack of options, but because she found something rare in Harrison Montgomery: respect. Unlike his children, Harrison had seen Amelia, really seen her. He noticed her voracious reading habits and began leaving books from his own library for her. He discovered her talent with numbers when she politely pointed out an error in some calculations he'd left on his desk. And when his wife died 15 years ago, it was Amelia who kept the household and Harrison from falling apart. What no one in the room knew, what no one had bothered to observe over the years, was that Harrison Montgomery's most trusted business advisor hadn't been his board of directors or his high-priced consultants. It had been the woman who brought him tea every afternoon at exactly 4:30 and stayed to discuss the day's challenges and opportunities. Setting music fades and softly. The Montgomery mansion stood on 5 acres of prime real estate overlooking the bay. Built in the 1920s, it boasted 27 rooms, each more opulent than the last. But it was a study where Harrison had spent most of his time, and it was in this room, his sanctum, that Judge Wilson had insisted the will be read. The walls were lined with leather-bound books. Many first editions were small fortunes themselves. A massive desk of Brazilian rosewood dominated one end of the room, while a seating area of butter-soft leather chairs formed a semicircle before the marble fireplace. Above the mantel hung a portrait of Harrison's late wife, Elizabeth, her gentle smile watching over proceedings with what now seemed like sad foreknowledge. The family had arranged themselves according to an unspoken hierarchy. Richard and Vanessa took the chairs closest to the desk, as if proximity to the judge might somehow influence the distribution of wealth. Patricia and Thomas sat primly on the love seat, while Marcus sprawled across an armchair, one leg thrown carelessly over the arm. Amelia had chosen to stand, as she always did, near the door, ready to serve, ready to fade into the background. Until now, Judge Wilson had known Harrison for over 40 years, since their days at Yale. He was perhaps the only person in the room besides Amelia who truly mourned the man rather than his money. He adjusted his bow tie in nervous habit before opening the thick envelope bearing the Montgomery family seal. "The last will and testament of Harrison James Montgomery," he began, his voice filling the cavernous room. Being of sound mind and body, the standard legal preamble gave way to the specific bequests. First came the grandchildren college funds, trust accounts, and specific heirlooms. Then the children, each receiving several $1 million in properties, but notably, no controlling interest in Montgomery Industries. Richard interrupted first. "This can't be right. Dad always said I would take over the company." Judge Wilson paused, looking over his glasses. "Your father's wishes regarding the company are outlined in Section 12. If I may continue." As he read on, it became clear that Harrison had established a complex network of trustees to oversee the company, effectively removing direct control from his children's hands. By the time Judge Wilson reached a bequest to Amelia, the family was already simmering with barely contained outrage. And then the bomb dropped. $20 million. The Cape Cod house where the family had spent their happiest summers. And a significant ownership stake in the company Richard had assumed would be his. The sound that escaped Patricia's throat was somewhere between a gasp and a scream. Richard's face turned a dangerous shade of red. Marcus knocked over his drink, not even noticing as the amber liquid seeped into the priceless Persian carpet. And Amelia stood. She hadn't planned to. For 25 years, she had kept her place, knowing exactly where the boundaries lay. But hearing her name, hearing Harrison's words as final message to her and to his family, something shifted inside her. So she rose to her feet, straight-backed and unflinching, meeting the shocked stares of the Montgomery family. In that frozen moment, as disbelief gave way to fury in the eyes of Harrison's children, Judge Wilson pulled one last envelope from inside the will. "Harrison also left a personal letter to be read at this time," he said, breaking the spell of silence. Tension music builds. "To my family," Judge Wilson read, Harrison's distinctive voice almost audible in his carefully chosen words. "By now, You have learned of my decision regarding Amelia. I can imagine your reaction, the shock, the anger, perhaps even the sense of betrayal. But before you give in to those emotions, before you race to your lawyers to contest this will, I ask you to listen to the truth that I was too much of a coward to tell you while I lived." Judge Wilson paused, glancing at Amelia, whose composure had begun to crack, a single tear tracing its way down her cheek. "Amelia Santos is not just my housekeeper. She has been my right hand, my moral compass, and the architect of much of the success you have benefited from for the past 2 decades. It was Amelia who identified the potential in the Asian markets when everyone advised against expansion. It was Amelia who suggested the Sustainable Materials Initiative that saved the company millions and earned us the Environmental Excellence Award. And it was Amelia who sat by my bed each night during my illness, not just as my caretaker, but as the only person who truly knew me both my strengths and my considerable failings." Richard shot to his feet. "This is absurd. She manipulated him when he was vulnerable. She's nothing but a—" "Mr. Montgomery," Judge Wilson interrupted sharply, "your father anticipated your reaction. If I may continue—" Richard sank back into his chair, seething. "To my children," the letter continued, "I have provided you with every advantage, every opportunity, and yes, enough money to ensure your comfort for the rest of your lives. But I have failed you in the ways that matter most. I didn't teach you the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, or the true meaning of family. For that, I am deeply sorry. Perhaps this final lesson, watching someone who earned her place in my life rather than being entitled to it by birth, will succeed where my lifetime of indulgence failed." Patricia was openly crying now. Whether from hurt or rage was impossible to tell. Marcus had gone completely still, staring at Amelia as if seeing her for the first time. "Amelia has served our family for 25 years. Not once did she ask for more than her modest salary. Not once did she complain about the countless holidays worked, the late nights, or the often thankless nature of her position. She has shown more loyalty to the Montgomery name than anyone who bears it. She has earned every penny I have left her, and more." Judge Wilson lowered the letter, looking around the room. "The letter continues with specific messages for each of you. Would you prefer I read these privately?" "Yes," Richard snapped, while simultaneously Patricia cried. "No!" It was then that Amelia spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Perhaps I should leave while you discuss family matters." "You are not family." Vanessa hissed, speaking for the first time. "Actually," Judge Wilson interjected, "there's more. Harrison specifically states that Amelia is to be present for the entire reading." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. What else had Harrison Montgomery hidden from his family? Music intensifies and transitions. The next hour unfolded like a carefully orchestrated drama, with Judge Wilson revealing layer after layer of Harrison's intricate plan. The personal messages to each child were brutally honest assessments of their failings, paired with pathways to redemption. Richard was offered a position on the board, but only after completing an ethics course and financial transparency training. Patricia would receive additional funds only by matching them with legitimate charitable work, actual work, not just party planning. Marcus was given 1 year to either complete his long-abandoned degree or find meaningful employment before receiving his full inheritance. Throughout it all, Amelia remained standing, her eyes fixed on Elizabeth's portrait rather than on the increasingly distraught family members. "This is nothing but the ravings of a senile old man." Richard finally exploded. He wasn't in his right mind. We all know it. The medications, the pain, he didn't know what he was doing. We'll contest this. Of course. No court will uphold this travesty. Your father's mental competency was evaluated 3 times during the drafting of this will. Judge Wilson replied calmly. The documentation is quite thorough. Additionally, there's a no contest clause. Should any of you challenge the will, you forfeit your entire inheritance. She brainwashed him, Patricia sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at Amelia. She saw an opportunity, and she took it, wormed her way into his confidence when he was at his weakest. Amelia finally turned to face them. "I have never asked your father for anything beyond my salary. This is as much a shock to me as it is to you." "Liar!" Patricia shrieked. "Enough!" The voice came from the doorway, where a young woman stood, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression resolute. Emily Montgomery, Richard's 21-year-old daughter, had arrived late to the reading, having come directly from her university 3 hours away. Emily crossed the room to stand beside Amelia. "I've listened to enough. You all should be ashamed of yourselves." "Emily, you don't understand," Richard began. "I understand perfectly, Dad. I understand that none of you visited Grandpa more than twice during his entire illness. I understand that while you were all too busy with your lives to spend time with him, Amelia was there every single day. And I understand that Grandpa wasn't stupid or manipulated. He knew exactly who cared about him and who only cared about his money." The room fell silent again, but this time with the uncomfortable weight of truth. Emily continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Do you know who came to every one of my swim meets when I was 12 and you were all too busy to drive me? Amelia. Do you know who helped me with my college applications when you said to just hire someone? Amelia. She's been more family to me than any of you." Judge Wilson cleared his throat. "There's one more item. Harrison recorded a video message 6 months ago. He asked that it be played only in the event that his decisions were questioned." Without waiting for a response, he pressed a button on a remote control. The large mirror above the fireplace slid aside to reveal a hidden television screen. A moment later, Harrison Montgomery's face appeared, gone from his illness, but with eyes as sharp and authoritative as ever. Soft, emotional music begins. "If you're watching this," Harrison began, "then my family has reacted exactly as I feared they would. So let me be crystal clear. Amelia Santos has been the heart of Montgomery Industries for years. While my children were spending my money, she was helping me make it, not as an employee, but as a partner." He paused, taking a labored breath. "Many of my best business decisions over the past 15 years came from Amelia's insights. She refused all offers of compensation beyond her salary, insisting that her job was to care for my home, not my company. Her integrity put all of us to shame." The camera pulled back slightly, revealing that Harrison was sitting in his favorite chair in this very study. "Richard, Patricia, Marcus, I've given you every advantage, only to watch you squander it. You've treated wealth as your birthright rather than a privilege and a responsibility. Amelia understands what you never bothered to learn, that true worth isn't measured in dollars." Harrison leaned forward, his expression softening. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because it's right. Because Amelia earned this through years of loyalty and wisdom that money can't buy. And because I truly hope that this wake-up call will help you become the people I know you can be." As the video ended, the room remained silent. Emily had taken Amelia's hand, holding it tightly in both of hers. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. "Is it true? Did you really help him run the company?" Amelia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Not officially. We would talk. He would ask my opinion. Sometimes he took my advice." "Like what?" Richard demanded, still skeptical but less hostile. "The children's hospital wing. That was her idea." Judge Wilson interjected. "Harrison told me it was Amelia who convinced him that it would not only be good PR, but the right thing to do. That project changed the company's entire corporate social responsibility approach. And the Sustainable Packaging Initiative," Amelia added quietly. "I read about the technology in a journal Mr. Montgomery had left in the library. I thought it might help with the production issues the company was facing. That initiative saved the company millions," Richard said slowly, realization dawning on his face. "Dad took all the credit for that breakthrough." "He offered to acknowledge my contribution," Amelia replied. "I declined. It wasn't my place." Patricia had stopped crying, her expression thoughtful as she studied the woman she had barely noticed for 25 years. "You could have asked for anything. Money, promotions. Why didn't you?" Amelia smiled slightly. "Because I didn't do it for reward, Mrs. Chapman. I did it because I respected your father, and because it was interesting work. My job was to care for him in this house. The rest was friendship." Music shifts to a more hopeful tone. The days following the will reading transformed the Montgomery household. Richard, after an initial consultation with his lawyers, was firmly advised that contesting the will would be both expensive and futile. The documentation of Harrison's mental competency was ironclad, and the video testimony would be devastating in court. Instead, Richard reluctantly met with Amelia, bringing the company financial reports she had helped create but never officially seen. Their first meeting lasted 6 hours. By the end, even Richard had to admit that Amelia's understanding of Montgomery Industries was comprehensive and insightful. Patricia approached things differently. After a week of avoidance, she invited Amelia to lunch, awkward, stilted, but beginning. "I need to understand," she said simply. "I need to know who my father really was, because I'm starting to think I never knew him at all." Marcus was a surprise. Of the 3 children, he had been the least outwardly hostile to Amelia's inheritance. 3 days after the reading, he appeared in the kitchen at 6 a.m., disheveled but sober. "Teach me," he said without preamble. "Teach me what you know about hard work, about earning something instead of just being given it." Emily became the bridge between Amelia and the family, the one person who had always seen the maid's true value. It was Emily who organized the first family dinner, with Amelia seated at the table rather than serving it. Emily who facilitated the painful but necessary conversations about the past and the future. And Amelia? She moved into the guest house rather than the main mansion, unable to break the habits of a lifetime overnight. She hired financial advisors and attorneys to help her navigate her new wealth, and she began the process of establishing a foundation in Harrison's name, a foundation focused on educational opportunities for service workers and their children. 6 months after Harrison's death, Amelia stood at the podium of Montgomery Industries' annual shareholder meeting. Beside her stood Richard, no longer resentful but respectful, Patricia, who had discovered a genuine talent for charitable organization, Marcus, who had enrolled in business school at 37 and was thriving, and Emily, whose proud smile reflected her grandfather's vision. Harrison Montgomery understood something fundamental about wealth. Amelia told the assembled shareholders. He understood that its true value lies not in what it can buy, but in what it can build, not in the power it grants to individuals, but in the potential it creates for communities. She looked out at the sea of faces, many shocked to see Harrison Montgomery's Maid speaking with such authority, others who had heard the remarkable story and come specifically to witness this moment. Harrison wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, particularly with his family, but in his final act, he tried to correct those mistakes. He tried to teach his children and all of us that worth isn't inherited. It's earned through integrity, hard work, and compassion. Richard stepped forward, taking his place beside Amelia at the microphone. "My father's last lesson was his most important. He showed us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by love, respect, and shared values. It took losing him to learn that lesson, but we're committed to honoring his legacy by living it every day." As applause filled the auditorium, Amelia caught sight of Judge Wilson in the back row, nodding his approval. She thought of Harrison, of their afternoon conversations, and his final, courageous choice to acknowledge her contribution, not because he had to, but because it was right. Music swells to conclusion. In the years that followed, the story of the Montgomery will become something of a legend in financial and legal circles. Some called it Harrison's revenge on his entitled children. Others saw it as a calculated move to ensure his company's future. But those who knew the truth understood it was simply his final act of justice, recognizing the quiet power of a woman who had spent her life in service, but whose wisdom had helped build an empire. The Montgomery children eventually came to terms with their father's decision, each finding their own path to redemption. Richard discovered that working alongside Amelia brought out leadership qualities he hadn't known he possessed. Patricia's charitable foundation became one of the most effective in the state, focusing on practical help rather than glitzy galas. And Marcus, to everyone's surprise, graduated with honors and launched a division of Montgomery Industries dedicated to environmental sustainability. As for Amelia, she never forgot where she came from. The woman who had spent 25 years serving others used her unexpected wealth to create opportunities for people like her, people with talent and determination, but without advantages. The Harrison Montgomery Scholarship Fund put hundreds of service workers and their children through college. The skills training program she established helped thousands more. When asked about her extraordinary journey from maid to millionaire, Amelia always gave the same answer. I didn't set out to earn his money. I simply tried to deserve his respect. The rest followed naturally. In the end, Harrison Montgomery's greatest legacy wasn't his fortune or even his company. It was the transformation he inspired in his family, in Amelia, and in all those touched by their story. He reminded us that true wealth isn't measured by what we possess, but by what we contribute. That family can be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the very ones we should value most. Thank you for joining me for the story of unexpected inheritance, redemption, and the true meaning of family and worth. If this tale of recognition and justice touched your heart, please hit the like button below. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone's true value being recognized after being overlooked? And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us of life's most important lessons.